What does perfect even mean? Is there even such a thing? Ooh, can we switch up all
the problems of me is that I tend to go off on tangents, talk too much. It's just that before I say something, like I'm about to start it now, I start to think about all the possible ways what I'm thinking about could be said and all the possible ways I could say it. And so I'm just going to stop. Okay? I'll show you clips, or if I haven't shown them already, of how I started this video and then went on a tangent and then my phone died. I'm thinking, my phone's on to me. It's shutting me up when I talk too much. Friend of mine called me today. Friend of hers had bought a car that wouldn't start. Got jumped, driven many miles, stopped, wouldn't start again, got jumped again, driven many miles again, stopped again, wouldn't start, got jumped again, and called my friend hysterically talking about, hey, new car, won't start. So my friend was like, well, let me call Faye, see if he has an idea. And typically, for those of you who, I don't know, whatever you do, most people call you for your advice without giving you details. And so friend's car wouldn't start. What do I think? Like, what kind of car is it? What year, make, model? How many miles? Did you get it from? A history. Which is one of the reasons why I like that show House. Amazing. But anyway, so long story short, some gentleman, the last person to jump start the car, said he had a tool to test the battery and told her that the battery was fine and that she needed an alternator. And I'm not going to say that I guarantee you my hand was in the, well, we'll see what happens. I'm almost sure, okay, at this point with the information that I got that I'm going to give you now, that there are probably many alternators that have been replaced based on similar analysis of batteries. So quick primer, I do have a video where a couple of my students came by for a tutoring lesson, and we talked about starting charging systems, voltage drops, and their connectivity, because while these components are in all cars, they're not always in the same place. Did we die again? No, we didn't die. What happened? All right. So I wanted them to be aware of how to diagnose these things. Now, this gentleman told her that her battery had sufficient voltage and that must be an alternator, and so she was like, I don't think I can afford an alternator right now, and she was up in arms. I'm like, well, here's a clue. When the engine is off, the electrical energy that the car needs is supplied by the battery. So depending on how much energy, chemical energy is stored in it, they have a finite amount of energy it can give you, and depending on what you use it to do, you have a finite amount of time to use that energy. So if you run the engine, the stereo, the wipers, the headlights, the turn signals, if you high energy demand devices, you'll use a lot of power and then run out of time. If you ever just sit there listening to tunes, with the engine off, less current demand, less power used, it might last a little longer. Anytime that the key is on and you see that red battery light or charge light, that's telling you that the charging system isn't supplying the electrical, whatever the electrical demand of the vehicle is. The charging system's not supplying that. What is supplying that is the battery. So just like if you had a flashlight, it was the only flashlight you had to last you through that dark and stormy night, you wouldn't just leave it on. Being cognizant of the fact that the battery is what is powering electrical devices if the engine is off is something that you can be aware of. When the engine is running, however, the alternator takes over that job and supplies, hopefully if it doesn't run a deficit. Some engineers do design their electrical charging systems to run just shy of 100% of every load that's in the car. What are the odds that you would have everything on all the time? But that said, the electrical demands of the vehicle should be supplied by the alternator. In that case, the circuitry will turn off that red light, letting you know now that the electricity isn't being supplied by the battery. if you can drive your car for any significant distance without losing certain functionality, because even on a battery you can drive the car. I think I did once, maybe 15 miles. That's with a battery, I don't say a weak battery, and a jump pack, a little portable jump pack. But yeah, I turned on the turn signal and the thing nearly stalled out, because guess where a lot of the energy went? Into a couple of turn signal bulbs. With that being the story I was given, realize now that if she can drive for prolonged distances, prolonged periods of time, the alternator is probably working. But when you need to start the car, there is no other source of electrical energy but the battery, and it can't do it. Now, your battery, like the one we have here, okay, is basically 6 lead acid cells in series, 2.1 volts each, so 12.6 volts. And because they are connected in series, individually they have some kind of internal resistance, and then there's the resistance all through the connections. So ultimately, a health test of that battery isn't not only the cumulative voltage output, but also the cumulative current output through all those internal resistances. So the metric of battery's output, its ability, is given in several different metrics: reserve capacity, cranking amps, and cold cranking amps. And this is the size, I believe. Yeah, but the definitions for these escape me right now. This is at 0 degrees. This is at 32 degrees. I believe it's 20 amps for the definition. I think 30 seconds or whatever. So you're cranking the starter here. This one is the supply. I want to say the 20 amps for how many minutes or something like that. So that's telling you how long you have to do that and so on. And 20 amps is a long time. Now, I don't quote me on these, but you get the concept that these are measurements of how many amps this thing can supply for 25 or 30 seconds at 0 degrees. And that's important because at 0 degrees, obviously the lead and the lead acid cells, the viscosity and the conductivity and the actual electrolytic characteristics of the cells change with temperature. This one is at 0 degrees. This one's at 32 degrees. And then this is how long you can pull power before the battery's dead. So that's 110 minutes, I believe, or something like that. All right. So basically, the metrics by which you would judge a battery vary. Okay. Now, while voltage is a valid one, it is not the only metric. Voltage is actually a very key metric in determining battery state of charge. The state of charge of a battery is actually very sensitive to its voltage output. So 12.6 is 100%, but I do believe that 12.4 is 75%, and so on and so forth. It's really, really close. So while voltage is a good metric for the state of charge, it's not indicative of how much power you can get out of that battery. So in addition to a voltmeter, you probably need something like this conductance meter that I have here. They come in various forms, and basically conductance is the inverse or the reciprocal of resistance. Now, the actual way this works is beyond this. This was just supposed to be informative. Oh, snap. Look at that. I completely... Well, for those of you who do or do not know, this is the Rattle Acura TL. You'll see that video there. There's an update for this coming, but we're talking about charging systems and batteries right now. So right now, this battery, a little different from the one that's down there, has a 725 cca rating. See that the lighting is terrible. There we go. The 24 battery. The metrics, the other metrics, are probably listed, but that's the common one. So I'm going to set this to that. All right. Now the thing about this 725. Oops. Now here's the interesting thing about what I'm about to do. This is actually going to check the conductance of the battery. And basically conductance, like I said, is the inverse of resistance. So technically if the resistance is low, conductance will be high. If resistance is high, conductance will be low. And that conductance directly relates to how much at the voltage. It also has a voltmeter in there. You'll see that shortly. But at that voltage, it can determine how much current can be delivered. So by pressing the green button here, it's going to think for a while, test, and it's going to give me a number. Okay, so we're looking for 725. Look at this now. This thing is telling me that we only have 177 cold cranking amps at 12.22. So remember I told you that the state of charge is very dependent on the voltage. Now, if you didn't know, this is basically, I want to say 25% or thereabouts state of charge, okay? And with that, okay, with the resistance of the battery, 25% charge can only put out that much, all right? So that's telling me right now, hey, replace this battery, because even if I get this back up, probably it won't be up to 725. Now, in this instance, this battery is overkill for this car. If I did not have the timing belt off, I would probably crank it, and it probably would, specifically because if I do this again at the 500 or 550 that this vehicle is supposed to, this vehicle's battery is supposed to be rated at, okay, we might get a different story. There we go, 550. Let's try that one. The voltage will probably be the same, but now the assessment of how much current, okay, no, so we must have a battery issue. 177, that still saves. Okay, so we may very well need a battery. It's interesting now that I'm finding stuff that, again, this is actually very good because I wasn't here for this, but again, this is how stuff happens. This is how information that doesn't get shared a lot of times just pops up. And if I didn't think to come in here and just have this little conversation, one, the idea that the metrics for which, by which batteries are rated would not have come up. Two, we wouldn't have found out that not only does this car need an intake tube, but also a battery. And three, I wouldn't have been able to share this information with you with such a practical example. But back to the lady this morning, finding out that she had driven several miles tells me that the electrical demands of the vehicle were being met by the alternator. If you've ever driven a car with the battery light on while you're driving and then it quits shortly thereafter, not shortly, maybe within 10, 15 minutes or even shorter, that's indicative of the fact that you were driving the vehicle and all the electrical load was being supplied by the battery that had a finite amount of energy to give. She didn't have that because while she was driving, I believe she and my friend were texting back and forth, and when I asked about any lights on the dash, I got a response back that no, there were none. So again, telling me that the light had been turned off by a functioning charging system. So I told her, drive straight to a auto store, Advanced Auto, AutoZone, O'Reilly, wherever you can find, and they'll typically do a charging or at the bare minimum a battery system test like this one. Some of these machines are equipped with charging system metrics also, so they can tell you the health of your charging system. And then if you need a battery, buy a battery. Okay, but the idea that alternators get sold wholesale with batteries and all kinds of stuff, one, because some people need to pay their mortgage, two, because they don't know any better, and three, because some customers are not educated, is one of the reasons why I've decided to make these videos. So I'm sorry if I went on a rant, on tangents, got long-winded, but I hope that this video, at least for the idea of the metrics that batteries are measured by, is helpful. Okay, so hopefully I'll be able to squeeze in a part 3, I guess now would be for the charging system, and you guys will hopefully find that useful also. So thanks for that, and cheers.